What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an overview of patch 2.1, which hit its beta phase yesterday from the time of this video, and given its proximity to the new DLC bringing the Shifter class on March 7th, it's very likely that this patch will officially drop with that DLC on that day, as that is usually what we see. But that said, this patch in the beta was just for the base game. There is no DLC content on display here, but nonetheless, I wanted to cover it because the patch is surprisingly large. Now, it doesn't make necessarily big changes to the game, but it makes a lot of small changes across the entire game. In total, there are hundreds of minor changes. Some of these are small balance fixes, some of these are for issues like lighting or navigation, and I thought we would go over the highlights of this, if for no other reason than preventing me from needing to cover it when I cover the DLC when it launches. So, with no further ado, let's actually jump into it and talk about some of these changes. So first and foremost, I mentioned a bunch of navigation fixes. This is mostly just fixes for various bits of pathing throughout the world, as well as small changes to things like the fog of war here and there. But basically, it should be easier to walk through a lot of areas in the game, with the lower city of Alushanira probably being the most notable one, with the rest of them largely being smaller sub-areas that you really don't spend much time in. But almost every act of the game saw some level of fix here, which is certainly nice to see. Next up, I wanted to talk about the Crusade battles, just a small bit of changes here, but some important ones that I think people will enjoy. So when you're actually in the tactical army mode, not traveling the world map or anything, but actually in the army battle mode, they've added an auto battle as well as a speed up function to this, which will allow you to, of course, increase the speed at which these go, on top of fixing a couple of minor bugs here relating to generals and being able to use their abilities effectively. And this is just the latest in a long line of subtle improvements that they've made to the army battles. If you haven't played the game in a while, you might want to check this out, as they have made significant changes to this over a steady course of time, with this just being the latest addition. It's still kind of the same fundamentally, but it has changed significantly since the launch of the game. Next up, we have a bunch of changes to the Midnight Isles DLC. If you are unaware, that is a sort of roguelite DLC that sees a lot of procedural generation, if you will, across a variety of islands. So they made a bunch of balance changes here, monsters spawning together or not, how things appear, things giving you experience or not doing so. The changes there are probably a little bit too numerous to name individually, as they touched a great deal of that DLC with these changes, from the random effects you can get on the islands to, again, things like monster composition, etc. They changed a lot there. So with any luck, that will be a better experience for people overall, though that said, at least for me, it wasn't that bad to begin with. Beyond that, they touched up a lot of the actual equipment in the game, that is to say items for your characters, and these were largely just standard fixes. In many cases, it was things only applying sometimes or in the wrong instances, so cases where you should be getting extra damage, you either weren't getting it all the time or it wasn't proccing correctly, that kind of thing. They fixed a lot of that stuff and made some minor changes to a few notable items. Now, the biggest change here to me was actually what they did with the Wide Sweep Scythe, which is a very popular scythe that you can get starting in Act 2 that essentially allows you to hit adjacent enemies for extra damage whenever you hit a normal enemy with this scythe. The reason this is so good, for those unaware, is that if you combine this with the cleave feat, it stacks, meaning that you'll get extra damage from the scythe itself, but then the cleave feat will also basically have the same effect, causing you to hit several adjacent enemies multiple times, and that combined with spells that increase the effectiveness of that scythe from a +2 up to a +5, and you can keep that an incredibly relevant weapon throughout the entire game, really. However, they've made a change to that causes it to deal less damage to adjacent enemies, so the additional targets will take less damage now, as opposed to the full damage it was doing before. Now, realistically, I think this has such a useful effect. You can probably still use this scythe effectively, but they've definitely reined it in, which honestly doesn't surprise me as it was incredibly OP. But honestly, a little bit of a bummer on that one. But then from there we have the biggest and most interesting changes, which is simply all of the changes to the actual classes and mechanics. Now, this is by far the biggest part of this patch, and even here, most of it is fixing niche cases. For instance, the Sirocco spell is now allowed to be bolstered with metamagic. But nonetheless, there are still still a lot of big changes here as well. For instance, all of the aspect of animal spells or effects that you can get are now affected by the mythic power Master Shapeshifter, which was done by adding the polymorph descriptor to them. And I'm very curious to see what people wind up with doing that, as Master Shapeshifter is a niche but very powerful mythic ability that will only get more useful with all of these animal aspects, which I imagine is a change they made in preparation for the shifter specifically, but we'll have to see how that one pans out. Pretty exciting change there though, honestly. Beyond this though, they fixed a variety of classes giving the incorrect bonuses from their abilities, such as the Imitator's various stances weren't giving the correct bonuses. They fixed that. And then probably the biggest winner, if you will, as far as the mechanical changes go, is actually the Kineticist. They made significant fixes here in terms of the descriptors of their abilities, and in particular they fixed the Blood Kineticist's charged Water Blast, which wasn't being assigned correctly, which combined with some previous fixes to the Kineticist, and the Blood Kineticist in particular, makes that an even more attractive pick, even if it was already a personal favorite of mine. They also fixed an issue with some of the animal companions not getting their trip attacks like they were supposed to, such as the boar and the mammoth, and in addition to character classes, they also did a variety of fixes to enemy mechanics as well. This was mostly real minor stuff. For instance, like Vescivores weren't considered evil. Their Gibber ability, which can cause confusion, also wasn't triggering the 24-hour immunity on characters that pass the check. That should be fixed now. And while those are the changes I'm happy to see, believe it or not, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as the classes and mechanical changes go. There are a ton of them. Again, mostly minor fixes, stuff that was largely fringe cases that I don't imagine a lot of people were seeing. So for that reason, I would still suggest you check out some of these patch notes for yourself if there's something very specific that you're looking for. But overall, even for the beta version of a patch, this is a pretty positive one to be sure. Even if it is, again, filled with mostly minor tweaks, it's nice to see the game still getting support, especially as the next DLC with the new class is about to drop, as I really don't see us getting a brand new Pathfinder game for at least another couple of years, so any content added here is something I'm happy to see. But that is pretty much all I've got for you guys today. I certainly hope you enjoyed this sort of brief overview of patch 2.1, again currently in beta, but given the short window between now and that next DLC, I really wouldn't anticipate too many changes here. But hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, thank you, may you wander in wisdom, and have an amazing day.